Kindness is something that's usually given out of generosity. We don't usually think of kindness as a debt, yet sometimes it is a debt. For example, if someone treats you kindly, they deserve to be treated kindly in return. You owe them a debt of kindness. If you owe kindness to someone who treats you kindly, what do you owe someone who treats you horribly? The shocking answer is that you owe that person a debt of kindness too. Now, how does that work? In chapter 12 of the book of Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, wrote that we should always strive for and work towards complete mastery of our thoughts, speech, and actions. This means that every time we become aware of a negative thought, such as resentment, anger, jealousy, etc., against someone else, we must resolutely drive it away. Moreover, as soon as there arises from one's heart to one's mind any animosity or hatred, God forbid, or jealousy, anger, or a grudge and their like, one must bar them from his mind and will, refusing even to think of them. On the contrary, his mind should prevail over and dominate the feelings of his heart to do a complete 180-degree turn and treat his fellow with the quality of loving kindness, to display towards his fellow a disproportionate love. The Alter Rebbe goes even further and states that one should always accept the hurt and suffering from someone else to the extreme without being provoked into anger, God forbid, or God forbid to take revenge in kind, and to repay offenders with favors, as taught in the Zohar, that we should learn from the example of Joseph's conduct with his brothers, when he repaid them for the suffering they brought upon him with kindness and favors. With this, he concludes chapter 12. Now, this is a very tall order. Is it even possible for us? Reb Shneur Zalman insisted that if we put our minds to it, we can achieve it. It is not impossible. It's merely a question of how far are we willing to go. Let's see how Joseph did it, and from there apply it to ourselves. When Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers, they shrank back in fear, expecting him to punish them for selling him into slavery. Yet, Joseph explained that he was actually grateful to them and felt he owed them a debt of kindness. Had his brothers not sold him into slavery, he would never have become the viceroy of Egypt. He owed his power and position to them and was therefore committed to paying them back with kindness. He saved their lives and gave them new and prosperous homes in Egypt. The brothers were flabbergasted. They couldn't believe it. Something good might have come from their terrible act, but they never intended it. They meant to hurt him. Yet Joseph's response was succinct. I know that you meant to harm me, he said, but your thoughts are irrelevant. Only God's thoughts are pertinent, and God intended for the sale to lead me to where I am today. If I consider your actions and dismiss your intentions, there's only one possible conclusion. I owe you, not the other way around. The brothers thought this was a trap. Years later, after their father's passing, they still expected Joseph to avenge the wrong they had done him. But he never did. He was serious. He didn't see it as wrong. He saw it as a kindness that ought to be repaid in kindness. When you consider it from this perspective, you realize that Joseph didn't sit there thinking that his brothers were wicked, but he was bigger than them. He really believed that he owed them a kindness. In our lives, when someone hurts us, we become agitated and we want revenge. We might be able to curb this desire to one degree or another, but it's hard to erase it completely. And it's almost impossible to turn ourselves around and repay those who harmed us with kindness, unless we take Joseph's perspective. There are two important principles of faith that we must train ourselves to believe. The first is that nothing happens unless God wills it. The second is that everything that God does is for the good. The first principle holds that even when others exercise their freedom of choice to hurt me, they can only succeed if God decrees that I be hurt on that day at that moment. If God decrees it, it will happen, whether the other person chooses to do it or someone else chooses to do it. If God doesn't decree it, then try as they might, they will fail to hurt me. This means that if they do succeed, it's only because God decreed it that I be hurt on this day. Now, they will have their personal accounting to settle with God. The fact that God decreed that I be hurt doesn't justify their behavior. However, That's not my score to settle with them. That's God's score to settle with them. As far as I'm concerned, I cannot blame them for hurting me. I was going to be hurt on this day, whether they chose to do it or not. Whom can I blame for getting hurt? Only God. So I should be upset with God, no? The answer is absolutely not. Because the second principle tells me that God meant it for the good. The perpetrator meant to hurt me, but God meant to help me. I can't be mad at someone who does me a favor, and God was doing me a favor. The typical example is the person who trips Mr. A and breaks his leg, God forbid. But when Mr. A goes to the hospital, the doctors discover an early-stage cancer that could otherwise have killed him, God forbid. That person meant to hurt Mr. A, but God meant to save Mr. A's life. If I divorce the perpetrator's intentions, which have no bearing on my life, from the perpetrator's actions, which has a direct bearing on my life, I will be grateful to the perpetrator for saving my life. Had Mr. A not been tripped, he could have died within months. By tripping him, the perpetrator saved his life. Now that deserves a kindness. The key is to train ourselves to believe that everything that seems negative is really positive. If we are fortunate, we get to see exactly how this is so. But not seeing how this is so doesn't mean it isn't so. The inescapable conclusion makes perfect sense if we train ourselves to see things this way. If someone did something with the intention of hurting me, that person really helped me. If that person helped me, I should repay him or her with kindness. Rabbi Shneur Zalman wasn't asking us to be as tolerant as the angels. He was asking us to train ourselves to think and to believe with perfect faith that A, all things that happen only because God decrees them, and B, all things that God does is for the best. Joseph was fortunate because he got to see how being sold led to his becoming the viceroy. But if we don't see it with our own eyes, we can still train ourselves to believe it in our minds, in our hearts, and deep down in our very souls. May we merit, as Joseph did, to see how everything that happens to us in our lives is for the good, decreed by God, for our own good and for the salvation of all those around us. I wish you a very good Shabbos.